Hello, everyone, and welcome to Running Fate, Game Prep and Analysis. Uh, I am your host, Amazing Rando, and what I'm going to do tonight is go over we're going to talk about the Fate game that we're running. As you may or may not know, we run the Accords, Distrust, in the District. It is a Dresden Files Accelerated game where we've done Session 0 and Session 1. Both of those sessions went off really well, and I'd like to kind of like recap what we've done so far and talk about what we're going to do in the future. Um, as you can see off to the side, I've got a list of things that I'd like to talk about tonight. And to give you a little bit of an overview, we're going to be talking about railroading a little bit. That was a discussion that came up at the end of the session with some players. We're going to talk about scaling back the conflict because the conflict that I wrote was a little bit more powerful, potent, and detailed than it needed to be. I want to talk about getting a feel for the player characters and starting to understand their characters and what their goals and motivations and personalities are like. I'd like to talk about layering in details, talking about how we can start to build a realistic and interesting world out of some of the details that we mentioned. And then I'd like to talk about what we're going to do next. If there are any players of the game who are watching this, shame on you. But you're adults, and I have faith that you will keep this information to yourself. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and start with the very first talking point. I've got a list over here off to the side. So, the way that I started the campaign, there are several different ways in which you can start a campaign. The most common throughout the years for me, I've been gaming for about 20 years. The most common that I've seen is kind of like everybody is either gathered up by a powerful force, be that like, a king or, some kind of large lawful power, or everybody meets in a bar. What I wanted to do was start the campaign in media res. And so I wanted to start it in the middle of something. And I wanted to be this large, complicated sort of like conflict set in the townhome of one of the major bad guys. So the Senator Middleton, if you remember from the last time I ran or did this running fate, we had created him as one of the big villains of the campaign. And so I wanted the players to have like a big complicated conflict there and have that be like the root, the formation of how they all got together. And so, in order to do this, I took a look at everybody's character sheets, looked at their aspects, and tried to kind of suss out what the players were going to do with their characters and what they wanted, and to try and create situations that would give those characters sort of like a meaningful way to be there and a meaningful way to connect together. I have a bunch of wonderful players and they roll with some punches, but there was a great deal of railroading that happened because I had to make assumptions and then put the characters into situations where they did not put themselves into. Like the players did not get to make the choices to be there, and so I had to make some decisions for them. This was. All of my players rolled with those punches rather well. I'm looking forward to not railroading them in the future. I actually don't like to do that sort of thing, but I wanted to, like I said, kick things off with a nice kind of boost, a nice an interesting conflict. So we started them off with this big conflict, and it was most of the session last week. Was this big conflict? Ravi, the Knight of the Lotus, was fighting a giant demonic blue crab, which is actually going to turn out to be one of the Denarians in the campaign. Uh, Michelle got involved with that fight as well, bringing those two sort of together. And then with Hux and Evie, I had them breaking into the house for separate reasons, and they didn't really overlap, but they were both there. They ended up both escaping out through windows and jumping into the pool, um, and so it was, it brought everyone together. Like I said, there was a little bit of some railroading. I'm not too proud of it, but I'm looking forward to from here on out moving things along in a very like organic sort of way. So let's talk about the next topic, which is scaling back the conflict. I'm going to go ahead and I would like to open my notes and so that I can look at those and kind of talk you through what choices I made. So the let's see. I've got the bad guys. So, nope, this is the one. So first and foremost, there was the giant blue crab. The giant blue crab I had created as one of the two Denarians who were going to be bad guys in the series. In addition to the Summoner, there are Denarians, and the two of them are going to sort of be like two bad guys. One is going to be the lead, the other is going to be a little bit more of a secondary bad guy. I'll talk about those thoughts maybe in a future one. I want to let the campaign move and see where the pacing goes. I created some aspects for this Denarian. So powerful geomancer, huge, camouflaged, and connected politically. I wasn't able to communicate all of these aspects in the conflict because it didn't come up. There wasn't a reason for the Denarian to be particularly camouflaged, to be able to camouflage. Huge, I think, came across well, and powerful geomancer came across as well. Um, but in the course of the fight, there were a couple of things that created problems. Um, and the first problem was the scale of their approaches. So as you can see here in the approaches, that I gave the Denarian +4 force, which is one higher than the apex skill or apex rank of the players, which is fine. That's great. But then whenever I added on a magical talent, which was stolen from the Dresden Files book. I made this like a kind of like a minor power um, in geomancy. So I gave it a +2 in forcefully defending, and that made it +6, which is 3 higher than what the players have, which made it really tough for them to hurt this creature. And it felt as though maybe it was too tough for the particular scene. Like I want the Denarians to be tough, but I don't want them to be ridiculously tough, and so I didn't particularly care for that. Um, but then in the scene, I actually had the Denarian use its burnt out condition, which again, that's from the minor talent mantle. I know it's probably not called minor talent, but precise name is escaping me, and I'd rather keep moving. It marked that, and whenever it marked burned out, it could create an unpassable terrain aspect in a scene, requiring everyone affected to make an overcome +4. Now, Ravi and Michelle were already close to it, and I kind of used the unpassable terrain as a way for it uh, get out, to concede the fight, and to move out of the fight. So that was a little bit scaled too hard. I also, as part of the design of the bad guy, I mismarked a couple of stresses. It took 3 points of stress, and it took an imperil as well. Um, oh, wait a minute, there was a big hit. Yeah. And it took cracked open shell as an aspect whenever it marked in peril. And I had written this chitinous shell here, that it was going to be like every time it takes a serious hit, it could mark off its shell, and this could represent its shell cracking. I wasn't too terribly happy when we were in play. It felt too hard to hurt. And so what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to bring its defenses down a little bit, and try to make this condition track here, this chitinous shell condition track, take the brunt of that damage to make the narrative match up with what's going on in the combat itself. So this was a little bit too powerful for the scene, and so it needs a little bit of massaging. Some other things that I had going on. Let's see, I am so the bodyguards I actually like. I think their apex skill was a little bit too high. It was +4 force with guns. I think that should have been a 2 instead of the 4. I think that would have felt better. I gave them a stunt that I particularly, or well, it's not really a stunt. It was a condition, as you can see down here. And a bodyguard could check this box, this in-service box, and it allows them to take stress for their charge by checking this box. But when this happens, they're taken out. So basically, represents that the bodyguards are there to protect the senator's family. And so this, I think, might be interesting and something that I'll carry forth. What I'll probably end up doing is making the bodyguards just reducing their abilities just a little bit. Um, so that I think is going to help. Let's talk about a couple of other things. There was a security system and a computer system that I had listed. The computer system here, I was going to have Evie's character, the hacker, the one played by Mallory. I was going to have her actually like need to defeat the computer in order to hack it. And I decided pretty early on that that seemed to be a waste of time. It was going to take too long and it was not going to be interesting. You can see here I made a note that said overcome 4, changed for time. So instead of needing to defeat the computer, like dealing at 6 stress or more, um, made it an overcome instead. The computer was going to kind of attack back with a 4. And what that was going to do is that was going to basically kind of take her out of the computer conflict. Like, so if the computer actually took her out, she would just be like unable to hack the computer system. Uh, so I did that. And then the security system I changed on the fly because I did not like it. So one thing I completely skipped was identify trespassers. I was going to have a method for identifying trespassers. I decided that that was a nuance that didn't need to happen. And then lockdown. Lockdown ended up not not really being used in any meaningful way. The when everything got locked down, no one tried to move zones, and then everything was released because of some things that Evie did. So as a result, it wasn't actually necessary. So generally, I'm pretty happy with the way that things went. But what was not happy about was that uh, my original scene that I wrote was a little bit too hard, too heavy, and so I just have to tweak it a little bit more. One of the things that I like about Fate is that I can actually tweak it as I go. And so what this means is that I can actually, if something is a little bit too hard, I can scale it back. And if something is too easy, I can scale it up. So it's still kind of feeling my way through all of that jazz. So let's talk next. We've talked about railroading. We've talked about scaling back the conflict. So let's talk about getting a feel for the PCs. The PCs themselves, I'm going to pull up my list of PCs and we're going to talk a little bit about them and what I've learned as a GM with them. So here we go. All right. So this is my handy dandy spreadsheet of player characters. And first, Hux. One of the things that I learned about Hux, which is played by John, is that Hux is going to be a little bit more of a talking character. This was one of the things John and I talked after the game, and one of the things that he mentioned is that he felt like he was kind of in a bit of a pickle because he was like in that den digging through things, wearing a balaclava, and basically wasn't able to talk himself out of a situation, which means that I, as a GM, kind of shorted him. I'm not going to do that again in the future, but I learned a little bit more about him. He wants to be like the face, so to speak. That's the impression that I've gotten. We'll see how it comes out in play. Maybe John will play him a little bit different, but this seems to be what John was going for. So he was shot in the shoulder. That was resolved, so that's actually going to be removed before the next session from my spreadsheet here. I leave these in the spreadsheet between sessions, just as a reminder at the beginning of the session to kind of go through and talk about that, like shot to the shoulder has been healed, the stress is reset, and bring that back. The next one that I want to talk about Evie. Let's see, let's do this. There we go. I want to talk about Evie. Evie's character, let's see, Mallory pretty much was solo for the whole combat. I was having a difficult time like drawing her in. Part of that's because of the situation that I put her in. But it was really nice at the end. She was the one who had the van for everybody to escape, and everyone escaped to the lair that we had devised in session 0. Everybody wanted to have a secret library lair, and so poof, there it is. Um, We're going to learn a little bit more about that layer at the beginning of the session that's next Tuesday. But Evie, let's see. So her disgusted by her hunger, she is a red court infected vampire that hasn't come into play yet. But the no firewall can stop me, broke ink addict. Um, I'm starting to get a good handle on what Evie's character is going to be like. We'll see how it works out in play. The next character, Michelle. Michelle um, so first, I want to say that Christopher's accent for it was excellent. I've got a soft spot for accents, for like doing character voices. Sometimes I'm good at it. Sometimes I'm horrible at it. You'll see as the game goes on. Sometimes I'm good at it and bad at it in the same sentence. Um, but I really liked Michelle. I feel that like we brought in some of the Earl King's interests just a little bit. Like for instance, when I compelled Michelle to like kind of call for backup because he's not sure what's going on, that's something that's going to come into play at the start of the next session. Um, and so kind of starting to bring in some of those complications from the characters. Um, Ravi, Ravi's situation is pretty straightforward. He got to fight the giant blue crab, and it was a good fight. And we were able to kind of add a visual element to the game. So despite the fact that like it's in the theater of the mind, we were able to kind of like imagine the field of peace that Ravi was able to generate, and we got like some really good visuals out of that, and that was nice. And so we got to see him like targeted by evil forces. We got to play like we leaned heavily into what Ravi was about. Um, and so that was quite good and quite nice. So I feel like I've got a decent introduction to the characters. I'm looking forward to the next session, letting everybody have longer chances to role play, and so then getting to know them even more. So let's see. So I've talked about getting a feel for the PCs. I want to talk about layering in some of the details that go along uh, with the game. So one of the things that I try to do with my Fate games is try to bring in little details and touches that kind of add meaning. And what I mean by that is, so one of the scenes that was actually, or one of the moments that was one of my favorites in the first session from last week was when Michelle was stitching up Hux. So Hux had that shoulder wound from a gunshot, and Michelle was tending to him. I decided that I was going to kind of add a little bit of a detail and have the thread that he used to stitch Hux up be a silver thread. So instead of it being like, like medicinal or ordinary, it's a little bit more extraordinary. And so this is one of those little touches that kind of starts to make the game feel like it evokes a feeling from the game. So now, like Hux, whenever he looks at his wound, he's going to have these silver stitches that it's not going to last very long. In fact, it might be something that doesn't even get mentioned again, but it provides a little bit of a feel and a flavor for the game. So these are some of the little things that we try to do when we layer in details. Um, I find that sometimes whenever I'm making decisions, I will actually look at the list of player aspects and try to figure out a way to kind of describe things in a way that ties into some of their aspects, because the aspects that the players create are telling me as a GM exactly what they want. It's saying that like Hux is an operative for the discarded. That means that he absolutely wants that organization in play. He wants that to be relevant. For instance, Ravi is a non-traditional traditionalist. So that is Ryan telling me that he wants his character to be conflicted on matters of faith versus, not attending to faith. Michelle wants to be like new in town and wants to kind of have that little like fish out of water sort of aspect. And so we need to, or I need to, as a GM, try to layer these sorts of story elements in. Um, so let's see. So what other? details did I layer in? There wasn't a whole lot to the game because it was mostly a combat or a conflict, which meant that it was mostly just kind of everybody beating on everybody else. And so there weren't a lot of those moments. I'm looking for some notes that I wrote down right now. Um, let's see. Uh, so no, I did not write down any useful notes of any layering that can go on. Um, so what I will do now is talk about what I plan on doing next. What are the next steps as far as the game goes with where we left it? So where we left off, the players had gotten to the Library of Congress, the Thomas Jefferson building, and they're about they technically did arrive at the secret headquarters sort of thing. What I'm going to do at the start of the next session is I'm going to actually prompt the players and ask for aspects for this secret layer. I'm probably going to ask for two or three, and just like describe what it looks like. Give me an aspect off of that. There's something unusual about the place. Give me an aspect off of that. So when I ask for aspects from players, instead of just saying like, okay, so you guys enter the secret, area, give me some aspects on it. Some players are really good at that. They can come up with something interesting on their own. What I find is that I seed it a little bit by asking specific questions. So I don't exactly have my question list. I'll probably do it on the fly during the game, but something along the lines of like, so I will ask um, Mallory. So she's playing Evie. I'll say like, so Evie lives here. Describe what it looks like for Evie to live here, and we're going to create an aspect from that. Then there's going to be, then I'm going to maybe I'll ask another question where I'll be like, I'll ask another player, why is this part of the library unknown? Like, is it a legitimate like hidden area? Is it off limits? Is it under construction? Tell me like why this area is available for you guys as this sort of thing. And then they'll tell me a little bit of a story, and we'll come up with an aspect off of that. And then depending on where we go, I don't want to have too many aspects for their layer, but I want them to be able to take ownership of it. So instead of me providing them with aspects, I'm going to ask them. I'm going to ask them to help me describe it and figure it out. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to let them converse amongst themselves. So they're all strangers. They've got this unifying thing going on. The takeaways that they have is that this demonic creature was there and had this fight. Ravi, the concession for this blue crab to have left was that it left a clue behind, and I'm going to reveal that the clue is actually a book. And this book is one of the books that I mentioned in my previous running fate, where it's a collection of books called the Picatrix, and there are four books for it, and it's going to be one of the books that has been stolen from the Middleton estate, from the senator's estate. And so what this is going to do is this is going to give them a clue of things to go for next. So what their hooks that they're going to have are they can look into the book, or rather the collection of books, to find out more information about what might be going on. There is the blue crab trying to figure out what it is, because Ravi did see it in its human form, so he could possibly track it down because that person would be on the guest list. Then third, I had a third. What was that? So the book that, um, yeah, all right. Well, there are two of them. And so they've got like a couple of hooks that they can go after. Oh, the third thing was that Evie managed to get her hooks into the Wi-Fi, which means that she could monitor communications on the estate, and maybe pull some interesting information. So there, as well as anything that the player characters invent, because remember, no plan as a GM survives contact with the players. So they've got some places to start, and I've got the framework of some ideas starting. So let me just go ahead and switch back over to, here we go. All right. So whenever I write like the next fate session, for a game, one of the things that I try to do is make sure that I write down something interesting for every character. And I want to make sure that, like, because I want to make sure every character gets attended to. Um, some get attended to more than others, but generally, I try to make sure that there's something for them all to do because I want to make sure that everybody gets a little bit of attention. So the let me see, I'm moving some windows around. All right. So Evie has access to the senator's Wi-Fi. Hux had silver thread in his wound. Ravi exposed himself as a Knight of the Lotus, and Michelle has sent word for backup. So what this means is that um, I can take it a bunch of different directions. So, based on what the players do, like I can have maybe the senator hires some hackers to kind of like backtrace what's going on with the Wi-Fi. I'm hesitant to do that just because of the fact that I downplayed the technical acumen of the actual setup, and so it feels kind of wrong to do that. So probably won't, but that exists. The silver thread that's in Hux, if an interesting opportunity presents itself, I want to mention that, but if it doesn't, that's okay too. Ravi, having worked the event and then exposing himself as a Knight of the Lotus, is going to provide for an interesting hook, and I'll go over that in a little bit. And then Michelle had sent word for backup. So, so talking through these things, let's go down here. The clue. So the blue crab left a book that it stole. I mentioned one of the four books of the Picatrix. And then the Middletons, the senator and his wife, are going to actually assume that the PCs are the ones who stole it. The reason for this is that like there's this giant like problem that happened. There was a team that came, and this book got stolen. It seems to make sense to me that the to lay the blame on the PCs. And so what this does is this means that like we've got some activity in the bad guys as well. Let's see, the Earl King's folks. So Michelle called for backup. This is going to take the form of a couple of goblins. These goblins are going to complicate things. It's not going to be like a conflict or anything, but the goblins are actually going to provide a gift for Hux. Because Hux is working with Sloan, I want to start like layering in and creating relationships between these different power groups. Now, I don't know exactly what those relationships look like because I want to see how things happen and play, but I want to start like laying some groundwork. And sometimes this groundwork is just doing weird things and seeing what sticks. In this instance, the goblins are going to actually provide Hux with a kind of a piece of gear, a single-use item called Lip Balm of Glibness. When this is used, he'll have to mark 2 boxes of indebted to the Earl King. And the effect of this is that for an entire scene, any action that involves talking is at scale. So what this means is that Hux, whose like big thing is going to be talking, will be able to talk with more of the authority of like the Earl King behind him. If he agrees to be indebted. And so this does a couple of things. One, this starts to lay the groundwork for a relationship between the Earl King um, and the Discarded, which is the group that Hux is a part of. So why is this happening? Well, we don't know. We'll see. We'll find out in play how those relationships start to build. Um, and what this also does is provides us with a temptation moment. So what this means is that Hux is going to have the ability to have power, but if he takes it, then he's going to be indebted to the Earl King, and then that debt will come due, which makes things a little bit more interesting. And so this is kind of a push and pull sort of situation. So Michelle's complication was that that Hux is going to be like tempted by this item. I know it doesn't feel like a complication for Michelle, but Michelle will be basically kind of like the standard bearer of this gift, and so his relationship with Hux is going to be further defined by this sort of thing. Then I don't know if I had notes on who Lloyd is. Lloyd is actually the Middletons have a ogre who is their lead bodyguard. Um, Lloyd was not at the party. Um, and the way that I've built Lloyd is that he is an overworked ogre. He is the bodyguard for the Middletons. This is just an assignment for him, um, and and he is a weapons expert, not a weapons export. Let me fix that typo. Um, so what this means is that we're going to have an ogre who is going to be very much into like his work as a bodyguard, but he also doesn't care. So what we have is somebody who wants to be an expert at what he does, but he's not like emotionally involved. And I don't mean that in like an emotionally distant sort of way, but more in a like this is kind of like this is a job. I clock in, I clock out. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. It's not personal. So so this is let's see. That's the rest of this is just some selections that I made whenever actually building him out. So the reason that I talk about this is that let's go back here. All right, so Lloyd, because Ravi was on the list of attendees for this party because he was working this party, Lloyd will actually be able to track down Ravi fairly easily. And so what's going to happen is that Lloyd is going to reach out to Ravi and basically kind of say like, listen, they want this book back. There's no need to involve the authorities. If you return it, everything's square, everything's copacetic. Um, and so that makes it interesting. So the players can choose to actually give the book back, and then like that loop is sort of closed. Um, or they can choose to not give the book, and then we'll have to see what happens in play as a result of that. That means that Lloyd is going to have to escalate things. I don't imagine that when Lloyd gets together with people that he is going to actually immediately start a fight if they say no. Um, because the way I envision it in my head is that Lloyd, the ogre, is smarter than that. He has seen what Ravi can do. He's like reviewed the tapes. He realizes that like he's going to need to make sure that he plays it smart, and so he'll play it smart. And so that will lead to an interesting situation down the line where if they say no, then they're going to have to deal with Lloyd trying to get the book back from them. Let's see. Uh, then the very last one that I've got here, I'm trying to make sure that I've got enough material ahead that we can keep playing. Like I don't feel that the material that I have here listed is enough to last a 2.5 hour session, and so I need to write some more. And I've got two things that I want to do for this. One is called Ritual Death, and the other is weightlifting book. So, what these two things are is two events that I'm going to be fleshing out between now and the next session. One is going to be a ritual death, and this ritual death is going to happen in one of the Middleton's complexes. It's going to be attached to the Middletons in some way, and this is going to kind of cast suspicion on the Middletons. And make the players like try to figure out why that happened and what might be going on. And then the other event that I'm going to write up, I've got it written here as weightlifting book. What this is going to be is this is going to be the second of the four Picatrix books. I'm imagining that. So sometimes I like to throw in odd things. And the odd idea that I have for this is that there is a like an owner of a bodybuilding club who is really into New Age books, really into mysticism. Someone who is like just a vanilla mortal, not like doesn't have any magic powers, is not a paranetter, none of the above, but collects all of these arcane books. And so like he's going to have like this crazy book collection, like it, and I'm going to have his home slash gym as part of like one complex. And what's going to happen is the gym is going to be attacked by, instead of the Denarians, it's going to be the Denarians like goons and some hellhounds, just to create a little bit of some diversification in what's going on. I might have one of the Denarians there, but then leave sort of immediately, just so that the players can kind of get a look at that. But I don't know. I haven't quite decided yet. And so I think that between like those things, between like a role playing scene between all of the players, figuring out about the clues that the characters have, dealing with the Earl King's folks who show up, which should be a short scene, but maybe it'll turn into a long role playing scene. Dealing with Lloyd, then dealing with this ritual death, and getting the book from the weightlifter. I feel that that's a solid session. I feel like it's going to be interesting. I think that the what I would probably do with the ritual death is do a challenge uh, in the ritual death scene. So whatever I want the players to get out of that, I'll probably do it as a challenge just to sort of montage it a little bit. Um, and then the scene with the weightlifter, that might, I think I would like to handle that as probably a conflict. Um, it might be a conflict with like just one or two rounds of something, and then at the end of the like the second round, depending on how long it is and how late it is, going into uh, a um, a contest, just to see if the heroes are able to stop them from getting away with the book or if they aren't. So I think that that is going to be the crux of like the next session. Um, so that is that. Let's see. So let's see. So we talked about railroading. We talked about scaling back the conflict. We talked about getting a feel for the player characters. We talked about layering in the details, and we talked about what I plan on doing next. So I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. I want to thank everyone for watching. Uh, Please remember to subscribe either here on Twitch or on YouTube. It's greatly appreciated. I love comments. I answer any messages anyone sends me, so it's greatly appreciated. So thank you very much, and have a good night. Bye, everybody.